Episode 2. If you haven't watched the first episode yet, I advise you to watch it first to understand the events of the story. You will find the first episode in the description, or in the channel. We were running like madmen, not knowing where we were going. All we wanted was to get away from them as quickly as possible. But the guard was fast, and was closing in on us quickly. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a gunshot, followed by Michael's scream. I stopped and turned to find him fallen on the ground, holding his arm, which was starting to bleed profusely. We didn't have time to think. I grabbed Michael and helped him up, and we began to run again. We could hear the guards' voices getting closer, but we didn't stop. We kept running until we could no longer hear anything but the sound of our hurried footsteps and our gasping breaths. The forest was dark and dense, the trees forming a barrier that prevented us from seeing the path. We were trying to move cautiously, but each step meant a new danger. Michael was in severe pain, and the wound on his arm was bleeding frighteningly. We had no tools to stop the bleeding, and we knew the situation was getting worse with time. After hours of continuous escape, we found a place to hide. It was a small cave hidden among the trees, barely visible from the outside. We sat inside, trying to catch our breath. I knew we had to think about the next step, but all I could think about was that I had survived so far. But Michael was in bad shape. He started to hallucinate from the pain, and his fever was rising. I could do nothing but try to calm him down. I felt completely helpless, and I knew we wouldn't be able to stay here for long. We needed to reach civilization, to anywhere we could get help. We had to move quickly, but as time passed, Michael's condition worsened. The forest was full of dangers, from predators to poisonous insects, and we were trying to avoid them by all possible means. But the wound on Michael's arm was getting worse, and I knew that infection had begun to spread. I could do nothing but watch him suffer. The nights were long and cold, and we were suffering from hunger and thirst. We had no tasty food, but we were eating some plants to stay alive. Those nights in the forest were a never-ending nightmare. Every minute felt like an hour, and every step we took meant a new risk. I didn't know if we would make it through the night or not, but the only thing I was sure of was that Michael wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. The fever had intensified, and hallucinations dominated his speech. He whispered incomprehensible words, sometimes calling out names of people whose memories might have faded, and sometimes talking about places I didn't know. He spoke of his family, of memories from his past life, as if he were living in another world far from the reality we were in. On one of those dark nights, I realized I would have to make a difficult decision. The wound on Michael's arm was festering rapidly, and we had no medical equipment or medicine to save him. Everything indicated that we would lose him soon if we didn't intervene. I wasn't a doctor, and I didn't know how to amputate his arm without killing him. But I had a strong feeling that if I didn't do something now, I would lose him forever. I began to gather my courage in that dark moment. I looked at Michael and saw him writhing in pain. His face was pale, and he was sweating profusely. I tried to hide my fear and calmly told him, "Michael, we need to do something about your arm. If we don't, you will lose your life." Michael's response wasn't clear, but he nodded as if he agreed with what I said. He was aware enough to know what we had to do. I took a deep breath and then started looking for something I could use to amputate his arm. I found a small knife that had been in my bag since the beginning. I hadn't known I would need it for this purpose. The wound was extremely infected, and a foul smell was emanating from it. I used all the strength and courage I had, and began the amputation. Michael was screaming in pain, but I couldn't stop. I knew that any delay meant the infection would spread to the rest of his body. I could feel the warm blood flowing over my hands, and the sound of the knife piercing through flesh and bone was nightmarish. I worked with intense focus, trying to finish as quickly as possible. After what felt like hours, I finally finished. Michael had lost consciousness, and I didn't know if it was from the pain or exhaustion. I was in a state of shock and disbelief, but there was no time to stop and think. We had to move quickly and find a safe place before we were discovered. I wrapped Michael's arm with a piece of cloth, trying to stop the bleeding as much as I could. My hands were trembling, and my heart was racing wildly. I wasn't sure if I had saved him or killed him. But there was no time for regret or doubt. We had to keep moving. In the following days, Michael's condition fluctuated between life and death. Sometimes he seemed better, as if he was improving, and other times he would suddenly deteriorate, sinking into a high fever. I tried with all my might to keep him alive, giving him water when he woke up, and trying to soothe him when he was delirious. I felt utterly helpless, but I knew I had to keep going, to keep hope alive, because it was the only thing that connected us to life. The forest showed no mercy. Every night brought with it a new challenge. We could hear the sounds of predators outside, and we tried to stay in the small cave we had found, away from the eyes of the guards we were sure were still searching for us. We didn't have enough food, and we relied on some wild plants and the water we could find with difficulty. Everything indicated that our end was near, but we clung to any glimmer of hope. After 3 weeks of this torment, Michael's conditions slowly began to improve. The fever started to subside, and the hallucinations became less frequent. I knew it was time to find a way out of this forest and back to civilization. We couldn't stay here any longer. We didn't have the resources or strength to survive for a longer period. One day, I decided I would search for an exit. I left Michael in the cave after making sure he was well enough to be alone for a few hours, and I began exploring the forest again. I walked slowly, trying to remember anything that could lead me to the main road or any sign indicating the presence of humans. I heard every sound around me, and tension completely consumed me. After hours of searching, I finally heard something unfamiliar, a sound that was distant yet clear. It was the sound of a car engine. I couldn't believe my ears at first. I thought I was hallucinating just like Michael had been, but the sound was repeating regularly. There was something real about this sound, and it indicated that a road was nearby. I quickly returned to Michael and told him what I had heard. His eyes sparkled with hope for the first time in a long while. He said to me in a weak but determined voice, "We have to go. Now." Our movement was slow and fraught with danger. Michael was still weak, and we had to stop several times for him to rest. But the voice was guiding us, like a compass leading us towards salvation. The closer we got, the clearer the voice became, and hope grew within us in a way I could not have imagined. Finally, after long hours of walking, we saw what we were looking for. There was an old dirt road running through part of the forest. An old truck was parked by the side of the road, and its driver was sitting nearby, smoking a cigarette without noticing our presence. That moment felt like seeing a mirage in the middle of the desert, as if we were dreaming, but reality was right in front of us. I cautiously emerged from among the trees, fear that this person might be working with the gang overwhelming me, but we had no other choice. I slowly raised my hand and signaled to Michael to stay hidden until I could assess the situation. I approached the driver slowly and then called out to him in English. My tone was hesitant, but I tried to show him that I was not a threat. The driver turned to me in surprise, as if he were seeing a ghost. He was an elderly man, wearing tattered clothes, and he looked exhausted. He hesitated for a moment before answering, and when he spoke, his English was broken, but he understood what I was saying. I told him we needed help and that there was an injured friend in the forest. The man hesitated a little, then nodded and agreed to help us. I signaled to Michael to come out of his hiding place and helped him reach the truck. The driver looked at us with a mix of astonishment and pity, perhaps thinking about our story and how we ended up in this situation, but we didn't have time to explain anything. All we wanted was to get out of this forest. With the help of the driver, we climbed into the truck. The seats were old and worn out, but I didn't care about that. I felt that we were closer to survival than ever before. The driver started the engine, and we took off down the dirt road. I looked out the window at the forest we had left behind, feeling a mix of relief and fear. We didn't know what awaited us at the end of this road, but we knew that everything would be better than what we had been through. The journey lasted for hours. The road was full of twists and potholes, and the truck shook violently with every bump. But Michael was silent the whole time. His eyes were closed as if he were trying to escape from physical and emotional pain. I knew he needed immediate medical attention, but we were far from any town or hospital. Finally, we arrived at a small village on the outskirts of the forest. The houses were simple. When we arrived at that small village on the outskirts of the forest, the sun had begun to set, painting golden lines across the dark blue sky. There was a strange feeling of calm enveloping the place, as if we had entered a world completely different from the hell we had left behind in the forest. The truck stopped in front of one of the small houses, and the elderly driver got out, signaling for us to exit. I got out of the truck first, then helped Michael down. He could barely stand, and I was almost carrying him entirely. Some villagers began to emerge from their homes to watch us. They looked at us with astonishment and curiosity, as they were not used to seeing strangers in this remote area. Their gazes held a mixture of pity and caution, but they did not hesitate to help when they saw Michael's condition. The driver led us to a small house on the edge of the village, where he told us that there was a doctor who treated villagers in emergencies. The house was very simple, made of brick and mud, but I felt a warmth and comfort in it that I hadn't felt in a long time. A middle-aged man opened the door. He had a short beard and simple clothes, and his eyes reflected a mixture of wisdom and fatigue. When he saw Michael's condition, he immediately understood that we needed urgent help. The doctor led us into the front room, which contained an old wooden bed and some basic medical tools. He asked me to place Michael on the bed, then began to examine him carefully. I stood beside the bed, anxiously watching every movement the doctor made. My heart was pounding fiercely, and I could think of nothing but whether Michael would survive or not. After a quick examination, the doctor looked at me and said in a calm voice, "He has lost a lot of blood, and the wounds have become infected. I will clean them now, but I need to give him antibiotics immediately. His condition is critical, and he needs rest." I nodded in agreement, but I couldn't speak. Fear had paralyzed me, and I didn't know what would happen next. The doctor began his work quickly and efficiently. He cleaned and disinfected the wounds, then gave Michael an injection of antibiotics. Michael was unconscious most of the time, but I could see signs of pain on his face with every movement the doctor made. After finishing treating Michael, the doctor turned to me and said, "You need to stay by his side tonight. It may take days for his condition to improve, and if there are any complications, we will need to transfer him to a nearby hospital." I thanked him gratefully and decided that I would stay by Michael no matter what it took. I sat on a wooden chair next to the bed, and night had fully fallen. The room was lit by the light of an old oil lamp, and the sounds of the night came from outside the open window. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe, but the worry for Michael never left me for a moment. The hours of the night passed very slowly, and every minute felt like an hour. I watched Michael's breathing and listened to his faint moans of pain. I remembered everything we had been through in the past weeks, and all the moments when we thought we wouldn't survive. But we were here now, in a place that felt like part of a different world, far from the nightmares each of us had lived. At dawn, Michael slowly began to regain consciousness. He weakly opened his eyes and looked at me as if trying to remember where he was. When he realized he was in a safe place, I saw a look of relief spread across his face for the first time in a long while. He tried to speak, but his voice was very weak. "Where are we?" he asked with difficulty, his tone filled with exhaustion. I smiled at him and said, "We are in a small village. We found a doctor here, and he treated you. You're okay now, but you need to rest." Michael nodded his head slowly, then closed his eyes again, as if he needed sleep more than anything else. I felt relieved to see him alive, but I knew the road to recovery would be long. The next day, the doctor returned to examine Michael again. His condition was stable, but it was clear he needed more advanced medical care. The doctor suggested that we try to transfer him to a hospital in the nearest city, which was about 3 hours away by car. Getting there meant we would finally be in real safety. We agreed immediately, and the doctor arranged for Michael to be transported in a small cart belonging to a villager. The cart was simple, but it was the only means to reach the city. We left the village with the sunrise, and the road was long and arduous. Episode 3? Available in the channel.